My name is Evelyn Hart. I'm 32 years old, and I am the Deputy Director of Counterintelligence at the FBI. It sounds strong, but the truth is, I've spent my whole life living in the shadow of my family, where every success of mine was dimmed by the glow of my younger sister. My deepest wound has never come from my work. It has come from the very people who should have loved me. One evening at my sister's wedding, my father raised his glass and told the crowd of guests, "Ava, you are the only pride of this family. And Evelyn," he looked straight at me and gave a cold smile, "you could not even keep a man." Laughter broke out, and I sat there, my heart sinking to the floor. I didn't scream. I only smiled, because I knew something they didn't. At the very moment they thought they had erased me from the story of our family, another truth was about to surface, one powerful enough to silence the entire room. And that was the moment when everything began to change forever. They would never understand the woman I have become, so let me take you back to where it all began. The house on Beacon Hill looked like a promise from the street. White paint, brass-shining flowers trimmed just so, and people believed that promise. Inside it was a stage for appearances. I was the older daughter expected to stay steady, while Ava, my younger sister, was lifted up as the star. Every small success of mine seemed to vanish in her shadow. I remember my 8th birthday. I had a cake with pink frosting, and when the candles were lit, someone asked Ava to dance. She twirled, and the guests clapped, and the night became hers. I smiled, but I felt myself fade. The same thing happened over and over. If I came second in a science fair, Ava had a recital. If I joined a team, the talk moved back to her costumes or her rehearsals. My parents' favourite line was, "Why can you not be more like your sister?" And each time it sank a little deeper. At 12, I carried home a certificate from the spelling bee. There was a cake waiting in the fridge with my name in blue icing. That night at dinner, my father raised his glass, but not to me. He toasted Ava's acceptance into a ballet program. The table clapped, the talk rolled on, and no one mentioned my win. The cake stayed in the fridge. Later, I whispered a wish over it in the dark kitchen. I did not wish for fame. I only wished to be seen. High school followed the same path. I studied, earned good grades, won debates, but the spotlight never turned my way. When I stood at graduation to give my valedictorian speech, my father cut in with a joke about how memorization was my only real gift. The audience laughed. I smiled like I agreed. Inside, I felt the knot of being unseen tighten. College gave me distance. I studied criminal justice at Boston University, worked shifts to pay bills, and stopped sending invitations to family events. They rarely came, but they drove hours for Ava's performances at Juilliard. My mother said, "At least you were practical, as if practicality was all I could offer." I chose not to argue. I learned to guard my silence. When I entered FBI training, I found something steadier than applause. The work mattered, and I discovered I was good at it. For the first time, I felt that my effort belonged to me, not to the judgment of people who barely noticed. I built friendships with those who cared about skill, not appearances. Slowly, I learned that respect could exist outside my family, and that I did not need to shrink to survive. Looking back, I understand I was shaped by both the neglect and the lessons I pulled from it. I became watchful. I learned to notice what people say when they think no one is listening, and to read the silences between words. Those skills would matter more than I could imagine. If this sounds like a sad story, it is, but not only sad. There were teachers who clapped at the right time, friends who encouraged me long walks, where I spoke aloud the kind of life I wanted. Those moments kept me standing. Still, the echo of that house followed me, the echo of being invisible in my own family. That is why, years later, when I walked into Ava's wedding in my best dress, I carried not just the weight of the present, but the ache of every forgotten birthday and every overlooked achievement. I carried the memory of candles burning down in a kitchen where no one sang, and I carried the silent promise I had made to myself back then. One day, I would not be invisible anymore. That promise was still warm in my mouth when the invitation arrived, thick, paper-heavy envelope gold letters pressed into cream. The marriage of Ava Hart and Brandon Whitmore IV. I stood at my kitchen counter and traced the edges with my thumb, and for a long breath I just listened to the quiet. It should have felt like family, but it felt like a summons. I was not surprised by that feeling. It had lived in me for years. I called Nathan and told him the date. He said he could push Tokyo, that nothing mattered more than being by my side. I heard the care in his voice, and I loved him for it, but I also knew what this was. I said, "Go, your work matters, I can manage one afternoon." He paused, then said he would have security nearby, discreet just in case. I said, "Thank you," and meant it. I set the invitation down and told myself this was about being steady, showing up and walking out with my head high. A few hours later, my mother called. Her tone was bright in that way she used when she had notes to deliver. "I am so glad you can come." She said it will be a very photographed event, so dress properly, something flattering, you understand. I said I would be there and let the rest hang in the air. After we hung up, I looked at my open closet and felt the old ache rise, the ache of trying to be the right shape for people who only look for flaws. I chose the green dress Nathan loved because it made me feel like myself, and the diamond studs he gave me small and clear. I practiced my smile in the mirror, not the wide one they preferred, the steady one that meant I would not bend. I told myself to breathe. In families like mine, the performance starts long before the music. I have learned to spot the marks on the floor. What I did not know then, and what I learned later, was how far they had taken the planning. My father and mother met the photographer the week before and said, "Frame the bride and groom, lean into the Whitmore line, and if the older daughter wanders in, take what you must, but nothing we cannot crop." It was not the first time they had tried to move me out of the frame. It was only the first time I would see the wires and decide to cut them in front of everyone. I tried to sleep that night and could not. I kept hearing my mother say dress properly, and I kept seeing the way a room turns its face to my sister and away from me. I have lived through worse than a cold shoulder, I told myself, but the truth is, it still stung. In the morning, I laid out my clutch. Badge and emergency phone went in first, not because I wanted to wear my title to a wedding, but because habit keeps you safe. Lipstick compact a folded note with the valet number I would need. I looked out the window at the line of brick houses and thought about being 12, about the cake in the fridge and the candles burning down without a song. That memory sat on my chest like a small weight, familiar and hard. I picked it up and put it in my pocket. Better to carry it on my terms than pretend it is not there. Nathan called from the airport. He said, "I love you and I will be on the phone if you need me, and the team is already in the area." I closed my eyes and let the sound of his voice settle me. I told him I would be careful. I told him I would call him when I left. When I hung up, I stood in the doorway for a moment and looked back at the quiet rooms we had built together, rooms where I am seen without effort. It made the next part easier. I drove across the city with the invitation on the seat beside me, and the dress folded like a calm promise around my knees. I was not going there to win anyone. I was going because I wanted to see with clear eyes who they are now and who I am now. At a red light, I caught my reflection in the glass of a storefront, the set of my shoulders, the way my chin holds steady when I am bracing for weather. I thought of all the times I had shrunk to fit a space that was never made for me, and wondered why I kept agreeing to visit it. the only honest answer was simple. Sometimes you return to the scene not to be welcomed, but to prove to yourself that you can leave on your own terms. When I pulled into the hotel driveway, I felt the old fear lift its head, but I did not feed it. I let the valet take the keys, and I stood for a moment under the awning to gather myself. I could hear a string quartet through the doors. I could see the sweep of flowers inside. I could almost hear my mother's voice about hemlines and posture. I smoothed the skirt and lifted my chin. Before I crossed the threshold, I made myself a quiet promise. I will walk and sit where they put me and keep my peace until I am done. I will leave when I choose, not 1 minute later and not 1 minute before. I did not know the photographer had been told to watch for me and to use a light hand with the shutter when I came into view. I did not know my name had been trimmed from the list for family formals, in case I failed to stand where they wanted. I did not know how many small hands had already moved the pieces while I was still choosing my earrings. But I knew myself. I knew the difference between being quiet out of strength and being silent out of fear. The doors opened and I stepped in with both feet, and the first thing I felt was the cool wash of air and the weight of 100 eyes that glanced past me without stopping. A young usher with a list and a practiced smile asked for my name, then led me across the room, past the glowing tables and the tall vases and the soft music, to a small round table pressed against the wall. Table 19, Miss Hart. He pulled out a chair and left me with a folded place card and a centerpiece that hid me from half the room. From where I sat, I could see the head table in perfect detail. My parents shone under the chandeliers. My mother turned toward the Whitmores, with that bright social smile, my father already holding court. And in the middle of everything, my sister, Ava White Silk, and Happy Noise the son, everyone leaned toward. No one waved me over. A few distant relatives glanced my way, then switched back to their stories. I smoothed my dress and told myself to breathe. A cousin of the bride arrived with a nervous laugh and a plate full of appetizers, set it down, and asked if anyone wanted the shrimp. I thanked her and took one to have something to do with my hands. The music floated, the laughter rose and fell, and I sat in the safe shadow of a fern and watched. I did not have to wait long for the first cut. Tiffany, my cousin, came toward me, in a silk dress the colour of champagne, arms wide, voice sweet. "Evelyn, it has been ages, you look lovely. Where did you find that dress? What a steal it must have been." She leaned in close as if to share a secret, and then spoke just loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "I heard you were seeing a professor for a while, and he ran off with his assistant." That must have been hard. A couple at table 18 made that tight little sound people make when they think gossip is charity. I felt the sting, then let it pass through me. I said, "You must be mixing me up with a story you like to tell," and I added nothing else because anything more would only feed it. She smiled like we had bonded and drifted away. Within minutes, the rumour was moving on its own legs, changing shape, picking up colour. Uncle Harold stopped by to see if I was still pushing papers for the government and told me those jobs never pay enough to catch a decent husband, then laughed and slapped the back of my chair as if we were sharing a joke. An aunt I barely knew admired my practical haircut. Someone asked if I had come alone and did not wait for an answer before turning back to the head table. I kept my voice for myself. I reached for water, not wine, and counted a slow breath in and a slow breath out. If I vanished, would anyone notice? The thought rose up, and I let it sit without shame. I looked at the doorway, at the crowd, at the circle of bridesmaids on the dance floor, at the photographer weaving between tables with a lens that seemed drawn to everyone but me. He lifted the camera when I was alone, and lowered it whenever I stood near a cluster of cousins, and at first I thought I was imagining it. Then I felt the cold logic of it. They were making a story out of light, a story in which I sat at the edge of my own family, one chair too far to be counted a glass in my hand, a smile that could be cropped. I put my glass down and folded my hands in my lap so I would not give them that picture. It did not matter. Another flash came anyway. A young server refilled my water with a careful hand and a softer voice, and asked if I needed anything else. I told him I was fine, and I meant the word in the most basic way. I was breathing. I could stand if I had to. I could leave when I chose. Across the room, Ava threw her head back and laughed, and for a moment, I remembered us as children, the two of us playing in the yard, while my mother called out reminders to keep our dresses clean. That memory landed like a small mercy, and then slipped away under the noise. A group of cousins formed a loose circle by the band, and I walked toward them because it felt right to try. They opened just enough to let me stand at the edge, then closed the gap with their shoulders. No one said anything. It was polite, and it was clear. I nodded, stepped back, and returned to table 19. I checked my phone. A message from Nathan waited simple and steady. "I am here if you need me," I typed a short reply. "I am fine." I looked up and let my face be still. The maid of honor took the microphone and began to speak about Ava, about a friendship that felt like having the sister she never had. The room laughed and clapped, and I felt my heart give a slow, tired turn. It was not new. It was only sharper because there were so many witnesses. The photographer lifted his camera again. The flash caught the rim of my glass and the line of my shoulder and the space to my right that no one filled. I thought of the cake in the fridge when I was 12, and how the candles burned down without a song. I thought of the vow I made afterward to stop asking for more than people could give. I thought of my promise that morning to leave on my own terms. I could hear my father's voice warming up across the room, the easy authority he wore like a coat, the sound that meant a speech was coming. My mother adjusted a centerpiece, then looked up to track the photographer, then turned her face back to the head table as if nothing in the corners could ever matter. I sat very still and let the ache spread, and then settle the kind that does not break you, the kind that reminds you where your bones are. If I vanished, would anyone notice? I knew at least one person would, the server with the careful hands, the man who had texted me from an airport across the world, and I knew who would not or not until noticing became a risk to their image. In that knowledge, there was a hard kind of peace. I lifted my chin and let the room be what it was. The clink of a glass cut through the music. My father had stood and raised his drink. The crowd fell quiet, ready to be told how this family shines. His voice filled the room with the confidence of a man who had spent his life commanding it. He spoke of Ava, of her beauty, of her talent, of the way she had never once let them down. He called her their pride, their joy, their only legacy. His words rolled smooth and strong, but each one landed heavy on me. I waited, though I knew better, for even the smallest acknowledgement, a name, a sentence, anything. It never came. My father lifted his glass higher and declared that Ava was their only pride. The room erupted in applause. I sat still at table 19, the clapping echoing in my chest like a hollow drum. I felt myself shrinking again, back into the quiet corner I had known all my life. I slipped out of my chair and made my way to the terrace. The cool air met me with a sharp relief, and I breathed as though I had been underwater. The fountain in the courtyard sparkled under the lights, and I thought for a moment I could hide there, invisible to everyone once more. But the quiet didn't last. My father's voice came behind me louder than it needed to be, the microphone still in his hand. "Leaving already, Meredith?" He called me out as if I were a child sneaking from the dinner table. I turned slowly, every guest now watching through the open doors. "Just getting some air," I said, my voice steady. "Running away, more like it," he boomed, the microphone catching every word. Classic Meredith, never able to stand the weight of family duty. Laughter trickled from the room, nervous but eager. My cheeks burned, though I kept my head high. He stepped closer, his words sharpened. You arrived alone, no one at your side, no one willing to claim you. 32 years old and not a prospect in sight. Meanwhile, your sister has secured a future any father would be proud of. I wanted to say, stop to tell him this was neither the place nor the time, but he pressed harder. You have always been jealous of her, he said. Always the failure, the disappointment. His face was hard, his eyes set. The room behind him had fallen completely silent. 100 eyes fixed on me, waiting to see what I would do. I whispered, please, stop. Stop what he demanded. Telling the truth. Telling them who you really are. He moved closer, and before I could step back, his hands hit my shoulders with a shove. I stumbled, my heels slipping against the wet stone. Then the cold hit me as I plunged backward into the fountain. The water rushed around me, shocking heavy, and for a moment I let it close over me. I surfaced to the sound of gasps, then laughter, and then the sharp crack of camera flashes. My dress clung, my hair fell into my eyes, my makeup stung as it ran. The water wasn't the worst of it. The worst was seeing my father smile as if he had proven something. My mother covered her mouth not with horror, but with the effort of hiding her own smile. Ava's eyes glowed with triumph. Around them, the crowd laughed and clapped as if this were a scene from a comedy. I pushed myself to my feet, the water pouring from my dress, and felt a stillness take over me. I looked at my father, then at every face turned toward me, and I spoke clearly, my voice carrying over the fountain and into the room. Remember this moment. Not a scream, not a plea, but a steady command. The laughter broke, the smiles faltered. My father's face stiffened, his certainty cracked. I stepped slowly out of the fountain, water dripping from my clothes, heels slipping on the stone, but my back straight. Each step left a wet trail across the floor, and no one moved to stop me. No one offered a hand or a word. I didn't need them. For the first time in my life, I didn't need anything from any of them. I kept my head high and walked past the tables, past the stairs, past the whispers that had gone still. I had been invisible all my life, erased, mocked, dismissed. Tonight, they tried to turn me into a joke, but I would not give them that. If they wanted to remember me, they would remember what they had done and how I stood in it without shame. I walked out of the ballroom dripping, but unbroken, and behind me, the silence held like a wall. My heels left a wet trail on the polished floor as I pushed open the door to the women's lounge. Inside, the lights glowed soft and warm, and for the first time all night, no one else was there. I caught sight of myself in the mirror and stopped. My hair clung flat to my face. Streaks of mascara ran like black rivers down my cheeks. My green dress hung heavy and dark with water. I looked like a woman dragged under and left to drown, and yet I did not flinch. For the first time in years, I met my own gaze without shame. They could laugh, they could point, they could freeze me out of every photo, but what mattered now was the reflection looking back at me. I whispered to myself, I no longer need their eyes. I only need mine. That truth settled into me like a stone sinking into still water, steady and unshakable. I found my clutch where I had left it earlier, and when I opened it, my phone screen lit up dry and unharmed. My finger hovered as if I should call Nathan, but instead I called Marcus. His voice came low and clear. Director, I told him to keep the team in position, that I was fine, that I was choosing to stay. For once in my life, I would not slip quietly through a side exit. I would walk back into that ballroom on my own terms. He asked if I needed an escort. I said no, not yet. I ended the call and looked at myself once more in the mirror. I did not look perfect. I looked strong. My mother would hate the difference, but I loved it. As I turned to leave, the door opened and Emma stepped inside. She stopped short when she saw me. Her eyes widened with the kind of concern no one else in that building had shown me. "Are you all right?" she asked. I gave a small nod, still dripping, still catching my breath. She slipped off her jacket and held it out. "It might not fit, but it will keep you warm," she said. I shook my head at first, but she pressed it into my hands. "Take it." Her voice was soft but firm, and that small act nearly undid me. I managed to whisper, "Thank you." She smiled faintly and leaned against the counter beside me. "I know how it feels." She said to be the one no one counts. In the Whitmore family, I am always the reminder of a second marriage, the one who never fits in the picture. For a moment, we just stood together, two women marked as outsiders, finding recognition in each other's silence. Her kindness steadied me more than 100 apologies ever could. I promised her quietly, "I will remember this." She squeezed my arm, then slipped back into the hall before anyone could notice. I sat down on the bench and opened the small bag I always carried. Out came the black sheath dress, folded tight for emergencies, plain and professional. I changed quickly, combed my wet hair back, and wiped away the streaks from my face. When I lifted my eyes to the mirror again, I barely recognized myself. The woman staring back wasn't the invisible daughter in green silk. She was someone who had walked through humiliation and chosen not to hide. I touched the cool glass with my fingertips and whispered, "They thought the fountain drowned me." They were wrong. It washed me clean. I slipped Emma's jacket over my shoulders, gathered my clutch and walked toward the ballroom doors, with my head high and my steps even. I did not think of what they might say or what photos might capture me this time. I thought only of the woman in the mirror and the promise she had made. I was not leaving broken. I was returning whole. With my hair pulled back and the black dress clinging dry against me, I walked through the doors of the ballroom once more. A hush followed me, in the kind that comes when people expect a scene, but are not sure what shape it will take. My mother's eyes narrowed, my father's jaw tightened. Ava froze for half a beat before tilting her head back toward her admirers. I did not rush. I crossed the floor until I stood where everyone could see me, then asked calmly for the microphone. A server hesitated, then placed it in my hand. The room quieted completely. I lifted it and said, "This wedding has been turned into a trial of me, a trial without defense. Tonight, I will present the evidence. You may judge for yourselves." The words surprised even me. They came steady like I had rehearsed them all my life. A murmur rippled through the guests. I pressed a button on my phone, and through the sound system came the low, unmistakable voice of my father. "Erase her if she appears, crop her out." "This is Ava's day." Gasps cut across the room. My father lunged forward, insisting it was out of context, that it was a joke that no one understood. But his voice betrayed him. The guests turned to each other, whispering. He wanted his own daughter erased. I looked straight at him. "You tried to cut me out of the album, out of the family story. Tonight, the whole room heard you." I let the silence hold a moment, then opened another file. On the screen of my phone appeared an email enlarged for the nearest guests to see. It was from my mother, written to Tiffany. "Spread the story about the professor. Make her look pitiful. The Whitmores must not see her as competition." Tiffany's face drained of colour. My mother's lips parted, but no sound came. I spoke evenly. The cruel little tale about me being abandoned was not gossip. It was planted by my own mother. People shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between us. I could hear a guest mutter, "What kind of mother does that?" My mother's hand trembled against her glass, but she did not deny it. I moved on. The photographer, I said, had instructions too. I held up a set of images intercepted from his drafts. One showed me at table 19, alone, glass in hand, cropped to exclude anyone nearby. Then I displayed the wide shot. Ava was in the corner, whispering, pointing, directing where I should stand so the frame would isolate me. I turned the two pictures for the guests to see. Alone, together. Together, alone. The truth in plain sight. Ava's cheeks flushed red beneath her makeup. "That is not true," she started, but the whispers had already begun. Guests leaned into each other, shaking heads, eyes filled with doubt and judgment. For the first time, Ava looked small. I lowered the phone and spoke into the microphone. My father ordered me erased. My mother spread lies about me. My sister staged my humiliation. And all of you laughed along. But tonight, the truth stands before you. You wanted to erase me from the album, from the memory of this family. But the real picture is here. The truth is the only picture that will last. The room buzzed with disbelief and shame. Some guests looked down at their plates, others at my parents with open disgust. The Whitmores exchanged uneasy glances. Richard's face was red, Vivian's frozen, Ava's lips pressed tight as if holding back a scream. Tiffany shrank into her chair. And me, I stood steady, breathing evenly into the silence. My father tried to shout, "Lies, manipulations, she is twisting everything." My mother pleaded, "This is not the time." Ava hissed, "You are ruining my wedding." But the crowd no longer believed them. I could feel it in the weight of their silence, in the way their eyes held on me no longer. Dismissing me, no longer laughing. For the first time in my life, the room saw me not as a shadow, not as the scapegoat, but as the voice holding them to account. I lowered the microphone, let the silence spread again, and simply said, "I am not invisible anymore." And the ballroom felt like a jury chamber, every guest a witness to what had just been exposed. I stood with the microphone still in my hand, the weight of silence pressing heavy across the room. That was when my father made his move. His face was flushed, his chest rising fast, but his voice came out steady, the voice of a man who had argued his way through countless courtrooms. He marched to the display table near the stage and seized the thick leather book resting there. It was the Campbell family genealogy, embossed in gold, a record kept for generations. He held it up for everyone to see. "This," he declared, "is what endures. The history of our family, the truth that no humiliation, no lies, no cheap tricks can destroy. My daughter Ava, our pride, will continue this legacy. But as for Evelyn, she has no place in these pages. Her line ends here." He pounded the book once with his hand, and I felt the air shift. Guests leaned forward, the drama pulling them in. My mother nodded with stiff approval, Ava's lips curved with quiet satisfaction. They thought this gesture would undo me. My father raised the book high, his voice booming. "Names matter, bloodlines matter, paper does not lie." I moved before he could say more. I walked across the floor and stopped directly in front of him. He tried to pull the book back, but I took it from his hands in one swift motion. Gasps rose from the tables as I carried it to the center of the dance floor, every eye following me. I held the book in both hands, feeling its weight, feeling centuries of their pride pressed into leather and ink. Then, without a word, I tore the first page clean across. The sound ripped through the silence louder than any shout. My father lunged forward, but I stepped back, ripping another, then another. Pages fluttered to the floor around me. The crowd froze. I lifted handfuls of paper high and released them into the air. White sheets scattered upward, caught in the light of the chandeliers, and fell slowly down like snow. They drifted across the polished floor, over the flowers onto the tables set with crystal and silver. The perfect wedding scene drowned in torn fragments of the family's legacy. I looked around the room, then raised my voice clear and steady. "You can erase my name from paper, but you will never erase me from the truth." The silence broke. A single clap came from the far side of the room. Then another. And then, as though a dam had burst, applause spread like fire. People rose from their chairs, clapping some even cheering. The sound shook the walls. For once, the eyes of this room were on me not with pity or scorn, but with something like respect. My father stood rooted, his face pale with fury. My mother's hand trembled against her chest. Ava's smile had vanished, her cheeks blotched red. I let the applause wash over me, not to drink it in, but to mark the shift. They had built their world on paper and appearances. I had torn both apart before their very eyes. I stood in the centre of the storm of pages, breathing steady, my head high. Narration filled me like a vow. They can no longer define me, not with words, not with ink, not with lies. For the first time, I was free. The applause was still swelling when the back doors opened and a new sound cut through the room, the steady rhythm of firm steps and quiet purpose. Guests turned as two men in dark suits moved along the aisle, not pushing, only guiding, and people made way, without quite knowing why. Then I saw him. Nathan stepped into the light as if he belonged there, calm and certain, his eyes finding me at once. He did not look at the torn pages on the floor or the faces around us. He walked straight to me, and when he reached my side, he took my hand as if we were the only two people in the room. Richard moved to block him, demanding an answer, but Nathan did not raise his voice. "I am Nathan Cole," he said, "Evelyn Hart's husband." The words did what nothing else had done all night. They pulled the air out of the room and left only the truth. A low wave of whispers rolled across the tables as names clicked into place. Nathan turned his head just enough to address the room without letting go of me. "I am sorry to miss the ceremony," he said. "I will not miss this." He looked to my father and mother, and the rustle of silk and paper went still. From the edge of the crowd, Marcus stepped forward, formal and composed. "Director Hart," he said, "your team requests confirmation on tonight's authorization." A murmur rose and then fell. "Director, not clerk, not desk, not rumour." My father's mouth opened, then closed, words caught behind pride and shock. Nathan's hand tightened around mine before he spoke again, his tone steady but edged with something that made even the band fall silent. "Evelyn is the youngest deputy director of counterintelligence in FBI history," he said. "She has earned every step. She has saved lives you will never know, and tonight she stood here alone and told the truth while you tried to turn her into a joke." The room did not cheer. It only listened, and listening was louder than any applause. My father found his voice and tried to twist it all into theatre. He called it a stunt, said I was exaggerating, that anyone could claim titles and wear a borrowed ring. He reached for the old script, the one where he decided what could be real. I met his eyes and felt no heat, only a clear, clean line inside me. "Would you have believed me," I asked, "or would you have found a way to diminish this too?" He had no answer that could stand. He looked at the guests and found no help there. He looked at my mother, who stared at the floor. He looked at Ava, who had nothing to give him. Nathan did not push the moment. He let it be what it was, then turned back to me and lowered his voice so it reached only our circle, and yet somehow reached the whole room. "You did not need me to stand tall," he said. "You already did. I felt the truth of that land inside my bones. I did not win because he walked in. I won because I had already chosen to stop shrinking. He was there as witness, not as rescue, and that mattered more than I could say." Marcus stayed near respectful, waiting for my cue. I nodded once. "Proceed with the plan, as discussed," I said, and he stepped back, the title, Director Hart, still hanging in the air like a bell that would not stop ringing. My father tried one last angle, asking Nathan, what kind of husband lets his wife arrive alone? What kind of man appears late and makes a spectacle of a private family matter? Nathan looked at him without anger. the kind who trusts his wife to decide how she wants to be seen, he said, and the kind who will never stand by while anyone lays a hand on her. He let that settle for a beat, and then added, I stood at the doors and watched you push your daughter into a fountain. The guests drew breath together, remembering the splash, the laughter, the flash of cameras, and then the silence that followed my words. My mother swayed as if the floor had moved. Ava looked away. I did not look away. I stood with Nathan's hand in mine and felt the story change shape under my feet, not because of his wealth or his name, but because he had spoken out loud what everyone had seen and no one had dared to say. The crowd shifted again, not with gossip this time, but with recognition. People who had watched me sit alone at table 19 now watched me stand with the man who knew me best, and it made a different kind of sense. I lifted the microphone one last time. I will not ask for your blessing, I said. I do not need it. I came here to tell the truth and to stop pretending that paper and photographs make a family. If you are capable of respect, show it to the people you claim to love. If you are not, then hear me clearly. I will be fine without it. I lowered the microphone, and the room held still, warm and quiet, the kind of quiet that does not push a person down, but lets her breathe. Nathan's thumb brushed the back of my hand, that small familiar touch that has always meant, I see you. I am with you. The security team eased back toward the doors. Marcus gave me a small nod. My father had nothing left to say. My mother tried to gather what remained of her poise. Ava stared at the scattered pages on the floor and must have known that no album could fix what was already done. I did not gloat. I did not bow. I simply stood there steady and whole and let the truth do its work. The room held the kind of quiet that settles after a storm, when everyone is still measuring the damage and deciding what matters now. Nathan's hand was warm around mine. Marcus waited a step behind, watchful but at ease. My parents stood a few feet away with faces that had not yet decided whether to harden or to soften. Then my father cleared his throat and took a slow step forward, the lawyer finding his footing again. Evelyn, he said, careful with my name, we should speak like a family. He glanced toward the Whitmores and the nearest tables and lowered his voice. We can still fix what people think they saw tonight. There will be press in the lobby. We can ask them to return in the morning. We present a united front. We stand together. My mother moved in beside him, her hand just brushing his sleeve. It is the only way to control the story, she said softly. You and Nathan at the centre, Ava and Brandon behind you, all of us together. One photograph. One message. We are a family. She offered a practiced smile, the one that had smoothed so many rough edges at so many parties. You deserve to be celebrated for your work, she went on. We have not said it enough. We will correct that. We will make sure the right people hear it. Funding, awards, the things that recognise importance. We will do it properly. My father nodded as if this were a negotiation moving in the proper direction. Your name will be formally restored in our records, he said, and on every platform that matters. We will speak about you with pride. We will make this right. The words were honeyed and heavy at the same time. I felt their pull because I am human and because a child inside me still wants what she never got. The thought came fast and bright. They will finally stand next to you. They will finally say your name like it belongs. For a breath, my chest loosened with that picture. Headlines that did not twist me. Dinners where my father did not make a joke at my expense. Introductions where my mother did not correct or diminish. The ache of being unseen quieting under applause. Then something steadier rose beneath it. I looked at the way my father's eyes kept sliding toward the door where the photographers would appear. I looked at the way my mother spoke about recognition, the way she had spoken about dresses and guest lists, and where a person should stand to make the room look good. I felt the old trap open at my feet, not loud, not cruel, just open and waiting. Nathan did not speak. He did not squeeze my hand to signal anything. He simply stayed beside me in the way that has always meant the choice is yours, and I will still be here when you make it. I let that steady me. Tell me something I said to my parents, and my voice came out calm. If none of this had happened, if I had stayed quiet at table 19, would you have wanted a press conference in the morning? Would you have wanted to stand beside me then? My father lifted his chin. We are talking about what is best for the family. My mother added, we are trying to heal. The words met air and went flat. Around us, the guests were pretending not to listen, which means they were listening to every breath. I could almost feel Emma somewhere in that circle sending me strength without a sound. I thought of the bathroom mirror and the sentence I had said to myself there. I no longer need their eyes. I only need mine. That memory cut clean through the fog. I hear your offer, I said. It is generous on the surface, but it is not about love. It is about saving face. My mother flinched, then tried again, softer. Honey, we are offering to celebrate you, your achievements, your marriage, your life. The old longing tugged once more, then let go. You are offering to display me, I said, as long as I help repair the image you care about. My father's voice sharpened. Appear with us tomorrow and people will move on. The stories will be corrected. Otherwise, this gets worse for everyone. He looked at Nathan, then measuring him. Measuring me, trying to find pressure points he could still use. Nathan let the look pass and said nothing. It was my turn. Inside me, 2 doors stood open. Behind one, a photo line and smooth statements and the warm rush of being called a credit to the family. Behind the other, the clean air of standing on my own, even if it meant another round of whispers from people who would never understand me. When I breathed in, the second door smelled like the truth. I will give you my answer, soon I said, because I wanted to end this night without shouting, but you should know what I will not do. I will not help you polish a lie. I will not stand in front of cameras so you can hold me up like a trophy and then put me back on a shelf when it suits you. If I stand next to you, it will be because you have learned respect, not because you fear headlines. My mother's mouth trembled. We can learn, she whispered. My father looked at me with a calculation that did not know how to stop calculating. Think carefully, he said. This is bigger than you. I felt the old anger try to rise and fall away. That I said has always been the problem. The room seemed to exhale. The Whitmores drifted back toward their own families. The guests resumed a polite hum. My parents stepped away to regroup, whispering to each other in tight circles of control. Nathan turned to me at last. Whatever you decide, he said, make sure it keeps you whole. I nodded and let my shoulders drop. The choice would not come from fear or hunger for approval. It would come from the woman who had stood in a fountain and refused to bow. I looked once more at the scattered pages on the floor, at the pieces of a story that used to own me, and I felt no regret. I was going to sleep on their offer and wake up with my answer, the kind that does not waver when the room starts talking again. I did. Morning light came clear through the curtains, and the answer was sitting there, as if it had waited by the bed all night. Nathan made coffee and did not ask what I would say. He only set a cup in my hands and kissed my temple, and that small kindness steadied me in a way less loud courage never could. We met my parents and Ava in a quiet lounge off the lobby, a room with soft chairs and a view of the river that looked calm even when the street below was not. My father began before I sat down, speaking in the careful tone he saves for juries and donors, reminding me of the plan for a joint appearance, explaining how one photograph could set the story straight, how one statement of unity would move the news cycle along. My mother added that we would celebrate me properly, that she had already made calls, that she wanted the city to know who I was to this family. Ava folded her hands in her lap and stared at the carpet. I listened without interrupting, and when they were finished, I set my cup down and spoke in the same calm voice I had found the night before. I appreciate that you want to repair what you broke, I said, but I will not be part of a performance. I do not need a stage, and I do not need a script. I do not need you to be proud of me anymore. The words settled over the room like a gentle blanket, warm and heavy and impossible to throw off. My father looked stunned, as if I had changed a rule he thought could not be changed. My mother blinked fast and pressed her fingers to her lips, as if to keep them from shaping the old answers. I kept going, because stopping then would have left room for the old pattern to slip back in. If there is to be a relationship between us, it will be on different terms, I said. No more comparisons, no more jokes at my expense to make a table laugh, no more using my name or my work to polish your image and then setting me aside when the lights are off. You will not speak about me as a problem to be managed or a story to be spun. You will speak to me as a person, and you will treat me with respect. If you cannot do that, then we will wish each other well from a distance. I will be fine. The silence that followed was not hostile. It was the sound of something breaking open. My mother was the first to step through it. Her voice came small and hoarse, like she had not used it for truth in a long time. I am sorry, she said. She seemed surprised to hear herself. I have chased approval and position for so long that I could not see what I was doing to my own child. I told myself that order and polish kept us safe, that the right friends and the right pictures and the right introductions would protect our name. I made you into a risk to be controlled. I was wrong. She wiped at her eyes and did not try to hide it. I am sorry, Evelyn. I am ready to learn another way if you let me. I felt the words land in me with a soft ache. They were not perfect, but they were real. I nodded not as a reward, but as an acknowledgement that truth had been spoken. Ava lifted her head. Her voice shook. I liked being the favourite, she said, and it made everything too easy. I told myself you did not care, that you were not trying, that you were fine on your own. When I saw the way they looked at you, I looked away, because it kept the attention on me. I gave the photographer those cues, because it felt like a game I knew how to win. It is not a game. I am ashamed. I am sorry. I did not rush to comfort her. I let the apology breathe. Thank you for saying it, I said at last. I am not ready to forgive today, but I am willing to see what you do next. My father sat back, his mouth set the lines at his eyes deepening. He said the word overreaction, then seemed to think better of it. He tried again, more measured, calling it a complicated situation, blaming stress and the pressure of the event, suggesting we should all be reasonable. I looked at him and felt how far the distance had grown without anger, only clarity. Reasonable would have been not pushing your daughter into a fountain, I said, and not ordering her erased. What I need from you is not a new explanation. What I need is a change. He looked away toward the river jaw, tight the way men do when they have reached the limits of their current courage. I did not chase him there. I turned back to both of them and set the final lines of the boundary in place. I will come to dinner only if there are no insults and no tests, I said. If a joke lands at my expense, I will get up and leave. I will not attend events where my place on the guest list is a bargaining chip. I will not appear in photographs taken to prove a point. If you want me in your life, then be honest about what you want and what you can give. If you need time to figure that out, take it. The door is open. It will not stay open if you keep using me." My mother nodded through fresh tears. Ava whispered that she understood. My father stayed silent, which for him might be the first honest thing he has done in years. Nathan did not add a word. He rested his hand at the small of my back, a quiet anchor that said I was not alone even if I chose to walk away. I stood, offered a small smile that was not a performance, and said I would be in touch when I was ready. I meant it. I walked out into the daylight with Nathan, and the cool air felt like clean water on tired skin. I had not won a prize. I had done something better. I had chosen the terms of my own peace and trusted myself to keep them. And a few days later, the first dinner happened under soft lamps that made the room look kinder than it felt. I arrived with Nathan steady at my side, and I reminded myself that I could leave the moment a line was crossed. My mother opened the door with eyes still red from sleepless nights and said she was glad I came. My father stood behind her, tired around the mouth, not ready to be gentle, but not ready to fight. We sat, and the table felt different because the rules were different. No small jabs, no comparisons, no tests. If any came, I would stand and go. The food was good, and the talk was careful, held together by pauses and sips of water. Ava asked about my work without making a joke, then caught herself and tried again when the first question landed wrong. My mother asked about the coffee place Nathan and I like on Sundays, and listened as if the answer mattered. My father kept his tone even, and when he drifted toward a familiar dig about practicality, he stopped himself, and that small restraint mattered more than any toast. We made it to dessert without breaking the rules. After dinner, my mother asked if she could speak alone. In the kitchen, with only the night over the river watching, she told me she had stepped down from her charity board. The whispers about the wedding had reached the donors, and she had decided to leave before they asked her to. She said the words with shame and relief mixed together, and admitted she had been using that position like a mirror to tell her who she was. Her voice shook when she said she wanted to learn to know herself, without borrowed light. I told her leaving did not make her smaller in my eyes. What would make her larger was telling the truth when it was hard again and again. She nodded and said she would try. The second dinner slipped. It was not dramatic. It was a careless story from my father about a client who had gone with another firm after the wedding told in a way that made me the reason for his loss. I put down my fork. Nathan felt me go still and did not speak for me. I looked at my father and said that I was sorry for the consequences and that they were his to carry, not mine. He bristled and called the world unfair, and then a small, sharp sentence about how I had embarrassed the family slid out like a blade he had forgotten he was holding. I stood. The room froze. I said we had an agreement and I would leave now, and I did. Nathan did not look back as we walked out. My phone buzzed before I reached home. It was a message from Emma, simple and kind. I am proud of you for keeping your promise to yourself. Do you want to come over next week for something easy and quiet? Emma became a bridge without asking for the name. She invited all of us in small groups, never the whole noisy family at once. At her table, the light was warm and the talk was ordinary, and that ordinary was what we needed. She asked my father about fishing and let him explain a knot in a line until his voice softened. She asked my mother for a recipe and listened as if it were an heirloom. She let Ava tell a story about missing a step in rehearsal and laughed with her, not at her. In those small rooms, we began to practice how to be people instead of parts in a show. There were steps forward and slips back. My father started anger management because his partners drew a boundary of their own. He went reluctantly. Then, one evening, he told me without drama that he had learned how often anger is really fear wearing a mask. He did not ask me to applaud. He only said it and then asked if the salmon was too dry. My mother caught herself before correcting me twice in 1 week. I saw the effort and named it out loud, and she looked grateful in a way I had never seen. Ava asked for my thoughts on a grant proposal for a youth arts class, and actually took the notes, not because I'm always right, but because for once she wanted my view. She still flinched when attention left her for too long, and sometimes she filled a silence with a story that put her in the best light, and then she would stop and say, "I am doing it again," and breathe. We were all learning. On a quiet night, Nathan and I had Emma over to our place, just the three of us. We cooked simple food and talked about nothing urgent. Emma told me she had grown up as the extra branch on a family tree, and that watching us try gave her hope for her own people. I told her she had been the first person to show me kindness that night, and that I was not sure I would have walked back into the ballroom without that anchor. She brushed it away and said we all hold each other up when it is our turn. There were still dinners that ended with tight shoulders. Once, my father snapped at a news story, and the air in the room changed. I stood, and he closed his eyes and said, "I am sorry, sit please." I sat because the apology came first and not after a lecture. Another time my mother slipped back into her old tone, and I placed my napkin down. She reached for my hand and said I heard myself and I am stopping. I stayed because she caught herself before I had to. These were small things. They were also the whole thing. I learned that healing does not look like a ribbon cut on a perfect new building. It looks like a table where people try again the next week and the next, and they keep the promises they made when the light was bright, even when no one is watching. We never pretended the past had not happened. We only agreed that the next hour could be different from the last. One evening, I left a dinner and realised I was not exhausted. The conversation had wandered through work and recipes and a neighbour's silly dog, and when my father asked about a case, he did it without poking, and when my mother said she was proud of my choices, I believed she meant respect, not display. I looked back through the window at their yellow lamps and felt something like cautious hope settle where the old ache used to live. It was not a promise. It was a chance. That was enough. It was not a promise. It was a chance. That was enough. 1 year later, that chance became a Saturday evening. In our kitchen, the windows open to the river breeze food on the counter, and people I chose filling the room. Nathan moved beside me, sleeves rolled, laughing as he turned bread in a pan. Marcus told a quiet story by the sink. Sophia passed around cherries, and Emma arrived with a pie and her easy warmth. A few minutes later, Ava and Brandon stepped in with a salad, and the nervous smiles of people who wanted to belong. My parents came last, small gifts in their hands softer than I remembered. We did not sit ahead of the table. Dishes passed hand to hand. Conversation flowed, sometimes careful, sometimes light. My father asked about fishing without slipping into a lecture. My mother listened to Emma's photos and laughed for real. Ava toasted almonds at the stove with me, and when I said perfect, she smiled like it mattered. These were not grand gestures, but they were different, and I felt the difference. Emma worked like a bridge. She drew my father into stories about his own father, asked my mother for the tale of her ring, told Ava that a young student loved ballet because of her video. Each time the air grew tense, she set it gently back down. I was grateful without needing to say so. As plates cleared, Vivian told me stepping down from the charity board had not ended her life, it had opened another. Richard admitted he had fewer clients now, but more quiet in his head, thanks to classes that taught him how to listen. Ava shared plans for a youth class, and asked for my advice not to compare, but to learn. Later, we carried coffee to the terrace. The city hummed below steady, indifferent almost kind. My father spoke with Marcus about a trout stream. My mother copied Emma's pie recipe carefully. Ava stood beside me and whispered, "I like it here." I told her I did too. When the last hugs were given and the door shut, Nathan leaned against the counter and asked how my heart felt. I told him the truth. It felt steady. It felt mine. Family is not only blood. It is who sees you clearly and still loves you. And for the first time, I did not have to choose between being myself and being loved. I could be both. And in that quiet truth, the story of my family found its place. If you are listening now and you know what it feels like to be overlooked, pushed aside, or made to feel less than enough, I want you to remember this. Your worth does not live in the approval of others. It lives in the way you see yourself when the noise fades. Healing is not quick, and it is not perfect. It may begin with saying no for the first time, or with sitting in silence instead of explaining yourself. Some people find it in prayer, some in long walks, some in writing down the words they were never allowed to speak, and some in the steady hand of a therapist or a trusted friend. There will be setbacks. There will be old voices that rise again. But with each boundary you keep, with each small kindness you accept, with each moment you choose to stay true to yourself, you build a life that cannot be erased. Family, in the truest sense, is found where you are seen and loved as you are. Thank you for walking with me through this story. If it touched something in you, I hope you stay with us, because there are many more stories waiting that might help you feel less alone. You are welcome here always.